All right, so welcome everyone to this Northwest NWACUHO webinar. My name is Megan Lockwood. I'm the Northwest NWACUHO Communications Director, and in my day job, I'm an Executive Assistant and Project Manager for University Housing and Dining Services at Oregon State University. Today, we're going to be hearing from Dong Vo and Karl Heinz from Western Washington University. Both of these folks have been amazing Northwest NWACUHO partners and participants over the last few years. So thank you so much for being here today. Their program is titled Administrative Theory to Practice, Developing Full-Time Staff Using Student Development Theory. They did present this at the 2025 annual conference, so it will be similar, if not the same to that program, but so many people didn't get to see it at that time. So I'm going to let Don and Karl introduce themselves a little bit more. So please take it away.
All right, thank you, Megan. I'll go ahead and share my screen here. Give me 1 second. All right. Carl, do you want to take it away?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. I'm Karl. I use he, him pronouns. I'm supervising resident director in residence life at Western Washington University, and I'll let Don give some thought.
And hi, everybody. My name is Dong. I use he, him, his pronouns. I'm an associate director for occupancy, communications, and admin services, also at Western. And we're happy to present our Northwest NWACUHO presentation today.
So Don and I will be presenting on our title is Administrative Theory of Practice, and kind of the scope is the idea of applying student development theory to full-time staff. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that as we continue. Before we get started, we wanted to acknowledge that we are not we are guests on the land that we are on here today at Western here in Bellingham, Washington. We wanted to acknowledge that the ancestral homelands of the Coast Salish peoples who have lived in the Salish Sea Basin throughout the San Juan Islands and North Cascades watershed from time immemorial. Please join me in expressing our deepest respect and gratitude for our Indigenous neighbors, the Lumbee Nation, and the Nooksack tribe for their enduring care and protection of our shared lands and waterways here in Bellingham.
Okay, so we are very excited to present today. We're very excited to present on this topic at Northwest NWACUHO. It's something that, Karl and I were talking about, things that made us kind of passionate about student affairs and graduate school and whatnot, and how this topic relates to our careers now and how we utilize this in our day-to-day. So the overview of our presentation today, I think it's helpful for both of us to share a little bit about our own career, our own journey, how we developed, and just to kind of flavor how we got to this topic and how you can hopefully translate some of the topics and things that we bring up today and translate that to your own work environment. Karl will talk a little bit about what the data shows us in terms of professional development and why development matters, and the importance of it. I'll certainly talk about who is this for? What's the audience? Karl had mentioned this is for staff, but breaking that further down, what type of staff? Who is that? Student staff, full-time staff, and whatnot. And then kind of further breaking down what is professional development. We do want to talk about the developmental theories in this context of professional development, work in the work environment and supporting your staff and recognizing who your staff are. And then we will have, we'll talk about some of our student development theory and how that informs work. Certainly we're not experts in those theories, and we're referring back to our graduate school days, but we want to illustrate and provide examples about how you can utilize some of these theories if you don't already, right? And I think many listeners will come to realize that, like, yeah, we do utilize some of these practices already, but the theory makes you a little bit more intentional about how you apply those things. And then we'll share some resources that can be helpful for any professionals in our field. So. All right. So we mentioned that we would like to share a little bit about our own journey. Um, Whether you know it or not, both Carl and I actually are Western alums, and we both have accounting degrees. That is a coincidence. We both started our careers in housing and residence life here. We actually both held the same jobs here as our first new professional job, and we both have the same supervisor in our development, but I don't want to go too much in depth. But you are talking to two accountants. We are very good at Excel, and we sometimes nerd out about that. And I will call up Carl and say, "Hey, I have an Excel problem," and then we will try to figure that out. And then we'd like to do a PSA to remind you to do your taxes by April 15th. So a little bit about us. I'll have Carl start and share his story.
So the picture of me and Dong there on the right is that was, I think, one of my first years in my first full-time job working in student housing after I had graduated from undergrad. And Dong had recently left that position for another role. So we worked together quite closely at the start of both of our careers, and we work together now that we're back at Western as well. But I just wanted to share a little bit about my story. I am where I am today, and I think I really attribute a lot of my success in working in student housing to the first supervisor that I had. Her name was June, and just the development that she gave to me in terms of opportunities. She saw me not just as someone who's here to do a job, but also saw my growth and my development as a priority, and asked me like what my goals were. And at the time, they were to eventually get a job as an accountant. And anyway, she really took into consideration what were my goals and how can she help to connect me with opportunities for learning and growth in our organization. And this her spending the time and energy on me and helping me make sure that I had opportunities to grow and develop made me feel really valued. It made me feel like I mattered here, and like I had a place here. And I wasn't just the person at the front desk doing reception and administrative support, but I was a key part of our office and the way that we operated. And so I just want to say that, yeah, like the way that my supervisor offered me opportunities for development helped me get to where I am today.
I have a very similar story since June also supervised me. But I want to share a little bit of my reflections when I first went straight out of undergrad into being frontline staff, a program coordinator at that desk. I struggled. I continue to this day now have to figure out how to navigate things of like, how do I remember sitting at that desk saying like, how do I sign off in an email? What's professional? Do I have a smiley face? Do I not? If I email a parent or a hall director versus a vice president or a provost, I'm scared. How do I navigate my own professional identity? And those early years, right out of undergrad, June helped form that piece, and people continue to form that piece within me. I looked at different peers and colleagues and looked to them as role models for different things. And in those early years, I was still trying to figure out. Those were pre-chat GPT days. I had to write my own emails. I mean, I still write my own emails to this day, but I had to figure out like what's the tone, how do I want to convey my professional identity, my authenticity in this type of work environment. And that to this day, I think those are things that you can utilize some of the theories and things to help you support your staff, the staff that you supervise, whether it's their identity, their racial identity, or where they are in their life and their ages and their goals. I think this is kind of where Carl and I wanted to start and talk about how do you look at that? How do you look at people you supervise and support? and how does that show up in the work environment? So on that topic, recognizing first and foremost, when you supervise staff, when you work with staff, what do we mean when we talk about professional development? A lot of times you're interviewing candidates and they're asking what kind of professional development is there. They might often be referring to, well, how much conference travel do I get to go to, right? And Karl and I, in those positions, we didn't have a lot of resources devoted towards those type of positions. It's not that we didn't get necessarily the opportunity to always go to conference travel, but thinking beyond what are you trying to develop in them? What are you trying to see in them? Where do you want to see them 5 years down the road? Is it getting work experience? What knowledge do you want them to obtain? How often is it? So you're thinking of things of this can be translatable to what type of training do I give to them? What type of ongoing training do I give to them? How frequently? Is it annually? Is it every fall? Is it every summer? Is it, some examples that we see are like, okay, maybe it's reading a book, maybe it's an article, maybe it's something at staff meetings. Do you do it in person? Do you do it virtually? Is it accessible to everybody, the way that you're doing it? And you're wanting to recognize who is this catering to. But we do want to illustrate that a lot of professional development exists in the day-to-day. It's just your interactions, the autonomy that Karl talks about in your work. It's the interactions with professionals and colleagues around you. A lot of that will help shape your identity as a professional and help you grow in those areas. I do also want to highlight, who do we typically think of or devote resources when we're talking about training, development, things like that? Both Karl and I, we come from the residence life housing background, and so that's a lot of the frame of reference that we're coming from. But even here, you see a lot of resources towards residence life staff, hall staff, student leaders, and whatnot. We want to also illustrate some of the people that also participate in your department. And particularly in this case, we'll use some housing examples. But there are a lot of frontline staff workers who, how do you get them to see their part in the greater vision, mission, or strategic plan? How do they see themselves as part of as educators when they interact with parents, community members, and students? Where do they want to go? Maybe it's a trade, maybe they want to move up in the department, but we don't want to forget that a lot of critical work is done by frontline workers, facilities folks, and just students who aren't even staffs, who aren't participating actively as student leaders or something, but what can we do to recognize their impact, their contributions, and also recognize potential within them? We have a few examples ourselves in our department where somebody was moving from a facilities and continues to move up in their roles and in their careers, but what pipelines exist for them to develop, and how you as supervisors kind of recognize those things. And so we do want to just make sure that that it's recognized that all of these people in your department play a really, really critical role. Sometimes your training are timed in a way where they can't participate, right? And so how can you make that more accessible as well? So. Okay.
As we transition into talking about employee development, one, I think, important question to answer is, why does development matter? We all want to, of course, be better versions of ourselves, but why should an organization or a supervisor invest time, money, resources into developing employees? One argument, Dom said that we both have accounting backgrounds, so something that's easy for us to think about in being strategic is, how does this affect money? So let's start there. So in terms of turnover of staff versus investment instead in employees. So one thing to look at is, what is the cost of turnover for a staff member? Employee Benefit News reports that it costs about a third of an employee's annual salary to the organization for the costs that are related for staff turning over. And I'll go into a little more detail in a bit about those different components. But whenever you lose a staff member, you're not just paying for their salary to do their job. When there's a gap in employment, there's other people in the organization who are missing information or have to do extra work or other things like that. So there is a financial cost, whether that's direct money or a cost of time. In this report, they found that about almost a quarter of staff who left their jobs. This isn't specific to higher ed. This is more of a national survey, but almost a quarter of them left their jobs related to a lack of growth in their career. And so employees are definitely looking for opportunities to continue growing and developing. And so in terms of it's important that organizations consider how are we helping our employees get the more development that they're looking for. In terms of how to, where can this money or resources come from for development? A lot of organizations have a specific set aside budget for development, whether that is some things like Don talked about, attending conferences, getting additional trainings, other certifications, but also time is a resource. And in this time that higher education institutions are in right now, where budgets are tight, spending money may not be an option, but spending time may be another option for development. Going a little bit more into some variables of the cost of turnover. This is just one way of trying to put a dollar figure on your organization's annual cost of staff turnover. So things that go into that create costs for either direct money or labor are hiring. So when you have a vacancy, you have a committee of people who are working to recruit and interview and select this person. That's time that they're spending doing that task when they could be doing other things. The cost of onboarding, whether like direct money or just staff time in training people, getting people up to speed, getting people caught up on what has been going on, where are we at in different processes. The cost, of course, of developing them. When a staff member leaves the organization, they probably got some development from the organization, either direct money or time. So that has a cost too. And then unfilled time, the time that other staff had to be doing parts of their job in the interim. You can kind of add up you can create a dollar figure, add all that up, and then multiply that by the number of employees times the annual employee turnover percentage. They kind of get some sort of dollar figure. How much money is turnover costing our organization? Now, a lot of these are, not super specific in what the components are, but in your organization, if you're being asked to think of things in terms of dollars and cents, something like this could be a helpful way of creating an argument in your organization of why we need to spend time or money on developing our staff. There's also other. I just mentioned a lot of direct costs. So the cost to recruit, the cost to interview and train new staff, but there's also a lot of indirect costs with staff turnover. Someone who's working in an organization for years, they build up a lot of knowledge, a lot of relationships, and when that person leaves, they're leaving all of that behind. And those are things that you can't just give to people or spend money or time on. You have to be built up. Lots of productivity. When a new employee is brought up to speed, that new employee is going to be slower at their work, less skilled at their work than that person who's been doing it for a long time. Team motivation can take a hit, and other pieces too. So there's definitely a lot of things to consider when thinking about loss of staff and staff turnover. Like I mentioned a second ago, I know a lot of organizations are working through budget challenges. Money doesn't have to be the only way to develop staff. Like, time is a resource. So what are some things that you can do in your organization to create opportunities for mentorship, whether in your own office, your own department, at the university as a whole, or in your organization? There are likely staff who are working on your teams who see other people doing other jobs and want to know more about, like, how can I work toward getting that next job in the area that you're working in? Or how did you get to the place that you are? So there's a lot of great opportunities for indirect staff development through mentorship and other just ways of people spending time peer to peer too. Another factor that helps retain staff, of course, is staff feeling like they have a sense of ownership and responsibility over their work. So these are a few things that a supervisor or a leadership in an organization can do with their employees to help make them feel like they're valued and their work matters. I think about the places that I've worked and the times that I felt the most valued and like I wanted to continue to work there were times that I felt like the work that I did was directly connected to or the organization's mission, values, goals. Like I could directly see how the work I'm doing is creating value for our organization. Getting to know staff beyond just that work relationship. Really listening to their input, asking them for input and listening and giving them opportunities to learn and grow in the ways that they want to that are related to the work that they're doing. Thanking staff for doing great work and giving as much independence and autonomy as possible. So those are just some things that anyone can do to help their team feel like they have more of a sense of ownership over their work and high commitment into the organization and the work that they're doing too.
All right. So some of these characters you might recognize for yourself. We share this kind of as tongue in cheek, but these can be real examples of colleagues that you interact with or staff that you work with, supervise with. So for example, Clark from The Office, your new staff member. Maybe they feel very eager to prove themselves, eager to learn, make their first sale. You might have Stanley also from The Office, who's there. They're there to do the minimum and go home. This is my job, this is what it's listed, and then I got to go home. You got Irving from Severance, overly obsessed with following policy to a T. No room for nuance or context or anything like that. You have Creed from The Office, never doing anything on task, seems to be doing anything except his own job. You have Leslie, the overachiever, goes above and beyond in every aspect, whether it's personal and professional for all colleagues in the office. And you have Ron, who's kind of the supervisor, might have different values from you, and you're working with this person. So we talk about this because I think there are parallels. We talk about the importance of professional development, but also recognizing who is it you're developing, who are you working with, who are you trying to support, who are you trying to develop. Each one of these characters requires different support, different areas of growth, different challenges to work with, right? And so taking it more to what you might see, you might have at times a difficult employee. You want to unpack that. Are they difficult for you, or are they just, what makes them a challenge for you to kind of work with? Are they unwilling to be open to change? Maybe they just need to learn something. Maybe they feel unprepared or not set up for success. Maybe you have a staff that's too black and white. They look at things as either it's this or this. And on the flip side, maybe you have somebody who's just too much in the gray. You need to just stick to the policies and procedures. Maybe you have staff who have difficulty aligning with changing strategic goals and missions. Maybe you're going through reorganization and whatnot, and they're having a difficult time kind of navigating that transition. Maybe they're just having motivational issues. Maybe there's intergenerational differences in communication. Maybe there's intergenerational differences between your student staff or staff who've been around for a lot longer. Or maybe it's related to different identities, race and sex and gender and whatnot as well. So That's what we want to kind of frame some of the things that you can rely on, some student development theories that might help kind of flavor where they're coming from, and what you can use to kind of better understand them and for them to understand themselves and for you to work with them. So we said we would talk about student development theory. Here we are. Um, Depending on your generation and when you went to graduate school, one of these textbooks might speak to you more than the other. For me, it's the green one in the center, and I think Karl is the white one on the farthest right, the most recent edition. But I still have the green book behind me in the blurred background. Behind there. But before we talk about it, we want to be clear, like there isn't necessarily one student theory that fits everybody. Everybody is complex, full of intersecting identities and everything. Certainly there are issues with the theories. They were developed and written and researched with predominantly white, male institutions and populations. So there are problems with some of the theories, and we want to acknowledge that. But we also want to bring a little bit of intentionality when you use some of these theories. They still give some context. They give shared language. They give a shared understanding or some beginning point for you to engage with your staff. I always joke with my colleagues that when my supervisor asks me, "What's your 5-year plan?" I don't always know the answer to that question. And so where then do we have the beginning of that conversation? I might not know where I want to go in my career. I might not know what to ask or the type of support that I need and how to ask for it. And so some of these things help you as a supervisor kind of give context, give shared language to better have that type of conversation. And even if you're not well versed in student development theory, I'm not saying that either of us are, we do some of this already in our day-to-day. And some examples are, maybe it's your horoscope, maybe it's your MBTI or Enneagram or a BuzzFeed quiz, right? Sometimes even just taking a BuzzFeed quiz allows you to say, yep, I am this kind of froyo. I have a lot of gummy bears in my froyo. What does that mean? And that starts a conversation. It's a starting point for you to better understand, okay, I like my frozen yogurt this way. Or you have a shared understanding of what it means if you're really into horoscopes when I say that I'm a Sagittarius and I married a Leo. That's a starting point for me and my wife to have a talk about what that means, whether it's true for us or not. But you have a shared framework for you to just start having that conversation, right? So you take some of these tests to better understand who you are. Some of it you'll agree with, some of it you won't. MBTI, I'm an ESTJ. Does that look the same in a professional environment or a personal environment? So again, these allow you to kind of have a little bit of a framework and a structure and shared language, which I think is really important for you and the other person to have in order to better explain where you're coming from and your perspectives. So Karl and I identified some theories that could be relevant, so that you have examples about how you can bring this into your work. We talk about how you can be intentional about using theory when working with students, but certainly we want you to reframe your thinking. Who is a student? If you're talking about being a lifelong learner, you are also a student. Your staff are people you teach and support. They are also students, right? And so making sure you have that perspective, you can then tie some of this stuff into your training for them or your support for them and whatnot. So one example, Sanford's challenge and support. You give your staff too much challenge, not enough support, you're not setting them up for success. Likewise, too much support not enough challenge, maybe they're not going to have enough growth. Maybe they'll feel like they're stuck in their careers and they don't have opportunities to grow and advance. So that's a basic example of challenge and support. Here are some more that you might see outside of student affairs as well. Some models that you might be familiar with. Tuckman's model of team development. Groups go through generally the 4 stages there: forming, storming, norming, and performing. You might have Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Again, we know not all of these are perfect models and theories, but it lends some understanding that if somebody's focused on their safety and physiological needs, they have something that they don't feel safe in their work environment, then that prevents them from perhaps focusing on some of the other higher aspects there. Bowman and Deal's 4 frames of leadership. So depending on where you sit at the institution, you might be looking at the same issue and seeing different things, different priorities based on where you're sitting politically at the institution. Baxter Magolda. So maybe you have a new professional like Dong Vo in 2010 who's used to following what his parents told him to do, what professors told him to do, what a manual told him to do, and always following those external formulas. And at some point through that lifespan of development, you come to a crossroads where you're having to figure out, who am I as a professional? Who do I want to be? How do I know that? You begin to develop your own internal voice and whatnot. And so this can also mirror the life of a professional and who they're trying to figure out who they are. Schlossberg's transition theory. Maybe you're trying to develop and improve onboarding for staff, as an example. How can you support their transition to a new role, a new job, a new institution, a new city? Depends on their situation. What's happening in their life? What's the context in which that they're going through? What are strategies and their sense of self? What support systems do they already have around them? Maybe it's a hall director who's joining a large team that can provide a lot of external support. Maybe it's one person who's just doesn't have other people that have this, they don't work on a team. Maybe they have just themselves and they're feeling a little nervous and they're not sure where to get their support. And then also strategies. What strategies do they already bring to navigate some of their unknowns for onboarding and whatnot? So some of these things can be really helpful when thinking about that as well. Earlier I mentioned folks who might think too much in the gray area or maybe too much in black and white. Mirrors also Perry's theory of intellectual and ethical development. When you're talking about black and white, you're talking a lot about dualism. This is the right way, this is the wrong way. And as you move along that spectrum, you get to a point where you might say, well, it depends. It depends on this. It depends on the context. It depends on that. Right and wrong it is in its own context, and it depends. So kind of using some of these theories helps you to develop the professional. There's some concrete things like challenge and support, but there's also things of like, how do I take on different perspectives of this theory might help you to understand somebody is like, the example I used earlier is like, how do I align myself with reorganization or changing strategic plans and whatnot? How do you go from like, okay, I thought that the institution's values were this, and now it's changing to this. And if you're thinking too black and white, you might say, well, okay, well, it challenges your kind of notion and understanding of what you knew to be true and then what that changes into. We do want to bring some other theories as well. Don't have time to go into them deeply, but maybe you work at a predominantly white institution, Helm's white identity development. There's a lot of critical race theories, different racial development theories out there that can help you understand what it means for white identity development. Jostelson's theory of identity development in women is very good as well. Erickson's psychosocial development, that spans from birth to the end of one's life as well. It spans their whole life. And so you can kind of see, okay, maybe you're working with somebody who's in their 40s. Okay, generally, what does Erickson's theory say might be their priorities and whatnot in life? And that might affect their priorities at work. King and Kitchener's reflective judgment model, that is a more epistemological model that talks about like, how do you know what you know? How do you create knowledge? How do you know what you don't know? Things like that as well. I have found that as you move up in your career, it is a lot, you get a lot less hand-holding and instructions and things like that. So you're having to kind of create and have an understanding of like, okay, like here's what I know, how do I navigate this and whatnot. So we do want to just, again, bring it back to thinking about how do you utilize some of those theories when talking about these types of staff. For example, these are different type of staff that you might encounter, that you are supporting, that you're working with. And some of these theories, when you reframe thinking like, hey, these are people who are still developing, they're still learning, they're still developing in the career. How do some of these theories might apply in their situation and their particular context? So. Okay, we will start wrapping it up, and we do want to share some resources here.
Don talked a lot about different student development careers and how they can be applied to working with staff. I want to remind you all too that there are a lot of other great frameworks that exist for helping to guide how you develop your teams. And that I know all of these have been well researched and well sourced, and a lot of authors came together to create these. So, like the NWACUHO core curriculum, things like the CAS standards, NASPA ACPA framework competencies, great tools that exist to give you, if you're a new supervisor or you're overseeing a functional area you haven't worked in before, just a space to understand what are others in the industry doing with their development, what are different competencies and areas of focus that matter. And they can give you a really great starting place for what types of development that your team might need. I supervise a full-time assistant resident director, and traditionally these are staff who this might be their first full-time job out of undergrad or their first full-time job in a higher education setting. And so a lot of them are kind of just dipping their feet into the waters of working in student affairs or higher education. And many of them aren't sure where they want to go next. And so after their first year of work in the role, I have my ARD staff member complete the NASPA ACPA self-competency assessment to assess for themselves. What do I know? What are some areas I already feel like I have a lot of great experience and skills in? And what are some other areas what other competencies in student affairs might I need some more growth or development or exposure to? So tools like this can help us frame how do we want to prioritize different areas of learning or things as we continue to work with and develop our staff too. So be sure to look at and reference existing tools like these.
So some closing thoughts for everybody is try to reframe who are we defining as students when we're developing our training, when we're doing our onboarding, when we're giving feedback, when we're evaluating them, when we're trying to support them, where are we trying, when we're supervising them, where are we trying to have them grow in? What resources are we devoting towards them? Who's getting some access to these resources? Are they accessible to everybody? We want to talk about what Karl talked about, the importance of development as cost savings and retention. And then I talked about theory, providing context, providing guidelines, providing framework, even with its flaws at times, but it gives you tools. It gives you language to connect with each other, to better express and explain who you are, where you're coming from, and in some cases measurable developmental tools, right? If it's a model that is a stage model, you might be able to work towards measuring their growth and development as well. And then, like I said, it provides common language and understanding. It gives you a starting point to start talking with each other about who you are, where you're trying to, and where you want to grow in. So, well, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us and listen to our presentation today. On the screen is our contact information. But with the time remaining, we're happy to stick behind and answer any questions as well. So
Thank you both. And anyone who has questions, you're welcome to just unmute and ask them, or you can put them in the chat if you don't want to ask them out loud.
I do have a question. Sorry, I'm unmuting myself. They, them pronouns. I work at Whitman College now, was at University of Puget Sound. I've met several of you. I'm just curious, when you're like applying some of these, are you doing any assessment? It sounds like you're giving them the ACPA competencies and letting them rate themselves and like rank. I haven't looked at that yet, so I'm going to check that out. But what other ways are you like assessing staff satisfaction and like growth?
I know in residence life, we're currently revamping a lot of our kind of department-wide professional development. So we're there. We don't currently have a norm or standard here. So kind of in that gap, I was wanting to use some sort of tool with my supervisee to just give us a starting point, and then kind of at our because we work on academic quarters and in the residence halls, it's really easy to kind of break up the year into quarters. I typically come back at the end of each quarter, kind of check in with my supervisee about, okay, at our last conversation at your evaluation in the summer, we talked about you wanting to grow in these specific areas. Let's look back at, were you able to start some projects that had to do with that, or were you able to join a campus committee that is related to that, or not? If things of course fall off the radar when work gets heavy and where there's a lot going on. So I think I don't have a really good answer for you in terms of how we've done like systematic assessment, but I think at the very least it's a helpful tool for us to keep looking back at, to see like, am I being accountable as a supervisor to what we talked about.
yeah, we do assessment with things with training. We collect feedback. We do assessment with milestones, events throughout the year, move in, move out, things like that. Onboarding, we receive feedback. So I don't want to mislead and say like we do specific, Karl and I do specific student development theory assessment. I think where I find it very helpful for myself and for my staff is in supporting them and trying to understand, like, some staff will struggle because they're to answer things like, where do you want to see your career? Where do you want to go? What are your goals? Folks who are used to being in discussions like that a lot, and I'll just use here as an example, like a lot of our resident directors engage in a lot of that conversation with their RAs and their staff. So they're used to reflecting on that. Asking somebody who might be like just doing billing all day, it might be a little bit harder for them to say like, nobody's asked me that. I don't know. And so for me as a supervisor to be able to rely on stuff like that, or right now I work in occupancy and whatnot, like asking somebody like, have you ever challenged your identities and who you are? Like it gives sharing some of these theories allows them to kind of be like, okay, I get what Dong is asking about. And I actually never thought about that. I shared in the presentation Jocelson's theory about women. In graduate school, we had to pick theories that spoke to us. And I actually when I read that book, it was like so enlightening. It was like I was like, how does this book know who I am? I'm like, I don't identify as a woman, but holy cow. So I wrote a whole paper about how it spoke to me and I better understood myself. And all of a sudden I felt more empowered because I had the words to express myself to somebody. So in a way that I felt like I couldn't before. And that's some of these series is helpful to share and to use because it helps empower them to explain themselves to you as a potential supervisor in a way that they might not have been able to prior. So
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you both so much.
I don't have a question per se, but I just want to say I really appreciated how you kind of like brought in like things outside of like the academic theories to kind of speak to this as someone who has not come up through like a student affairs master's program or anything like that. I was worried I was going to get lost in some, big theories, and it was really refreshing to hear all kinds of different ways to approach this.
I've told my staff that from time to time that, and I've used icebreakers, like just because I have a master's degree in student affairs doesn't mean that I am all of a sudden better or an expert at icebreakers, right? Like there's somebody who might not have that and be so good, so engaging, so great at icebreakers. I think that the degree gives context of like why might icebreakers be effective. But that doesn't necessarily mean you're good at it. I mean, I could know the logistics, the mechanics of being a quarterback. Doesn't mean I'm Tom Brady. But certainly we look for tools um, to help play football or learn how to throw football and things like that, right? So yeah.
Well, thank you. Are there any other questions from our attendees? Uh, all right. Well, thank you so much, Don and Carl. Thank you everyone for joining us. We know a lot of people were unable to attend. It is a very crazy time of year. So the recording of this will go up on our YouTube channel very soon. So if you have colleagues who maybe were hoping to attend, please let them know. And yeah, thank you all again. Hope to see you very soon.
Thank you.